my identification also with the Jewish state has always been a source, at least in part, of real pride. I can remember the make the desert bloom aspect of Israel one heard about in the 50s. Um, and when I hear something like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, I think about what was often said in like the 1960s or maybe 70s. I don't know. I can't remember what the years were, but the only Arabs that really had the freedom to participate in a democratic process were the Arabs that were citizens of Israel, which is 20% of the country. There always have been problems, but for a very long time, the problems were of the Arab nations around the Jewish state refusing to allow it to exist in peace. But things have changed over time in ways that I've found painful. A guy like Ariel Sharon becoming prime minister after his being implicated in what are the words? War crimes in Lebanon in 2002. And then gradually the long reign of Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing hawkish gang, which we now know a lot about how they were weakening the force that with whom I would want a decent Israel to seek to find some kind of long-term peace. Ehud Barak had offered something that was that at Camp David in 2000, but once we get to this, the last 20 couple years, we've got an Israel that is rejectionist in the picture in a way that the Arab states had been the rejectionists until Anwar Sadat in '79 was willing to go to meet Menachem Begin. That great moment led to the Camp David Accords. Well, all this time, it's been a bit of a mixed picture, but it was basically seeing from a distance that Israel was really a pretty impressive accomplishment, including some of that David and Goliath aspect that allowed little Israel to win the war in 1967 in a mere 6 days when all the Arab countries were about to invade. Yeah, it was kind of gratifying to identify with this little giant that was emerging. But it became more painful when Israel no longer acted in a way that my values, and the values of Rabbi Hillel, that says, while standing on one foot is what Judaism is supposed to be about, which is that which is hateful to you, do not do to the other, which is just essentially the Jesus' golden rule expressed sooner and in the negative form. But basically, the Israelis have stopped treating the Palestinians and be acceptable to them if the roles were reversed. Nonetheless, my wife and I went in 2017 to Israel to spend 6 weeks going over the country. We were there in Jerusalem the day that Donald Trump was inaugurated. And it was the Sabbath. Jerusalem is a city in which the Orthodox had too much power. It's kind of hard to find a coffee shop, but we went out to indicate, it's not just the Israelis that have an embarrassing. On the day that Donald Trump became president, I was embarrassed to be an American. That was the greater problem. Though the Netanyahu's potential crimes and trials were already visible on the horizon during those 6 weeks we were in Israel. But still, spending time in Israel, I found it really a wonderful country in so many ways. It is something I really could take pride in, that the same cultural stream that had produced my grandparents and brought them to America, and enabled my parents and now the next generation, me and my brother, to become the kinds of Americans that we are in a free society. That same stream had produced people that could create the society that we visited, which is really quite a marvelous thing. If you want to Google my name and the phrase "amazing Jerusalem," you'll see how moved I was by the extraordinary thing I found there. Not partly extraordinary because of what these generations in our times have created there as a society, and partly because, of course, of all the civilizational values that there are embedded in this special city in the history of humankind. I compare it with Paris, I compare it with New York, each of them having their own special quality, but there is something magical and well, that's the wrong, amazing was in Jerusalem. So I have connection with that country that is important enough to my heart that detracts in no ways from my being an American fighting to protect American democracy. No dual loyalty issues here. And the problems have now painfully overwhelmed that feeling that enabled me to take pride. Well, not entirely overwhelmed. I mean, it's a mixture, but at the moment, what Israel is showing seems to me quite broken. Its ugliness. I mean, what they're doing to Gaza, you have to say it's ugly. A separate question, was there something else they should have done? Separate question, but it is ugly. But it's not just ugly. It appears to me to be quite clearly that Israel, faced with the challenge that October 7th placed upon them, jumped into the trap that it is obvious is precisely what underlay those atrocities that Hamas had prepared and rehearsed and was doing, obviously, for some reason. I mean, they may be evil people. I mean, this is the people who would be willing to do such unspeakable things. If they're not going to be considered agents of evil, who will? But we know, having fought, for example, the Nazis back in World War II, that being evil doesn't mean being stupid. So Hamas planned this thing to achieve its purposes. What are its purposes? Well, the elimination of the state of Israel. they can see that the state of Israel is beginning to ensconce itself in the region in a more permanent way. Is these Abraham Accords represent the integration of the Jewish state into the Arab world, and there are reports apparently that leading to people to believe that a deal between the United States, brokered by the United States and maybe bankrolled in some way by the United States, to form a normal relationship of some sort between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is, I guess, a big deal. I don't know if it's why Saudi Arabia is quite the big deal that they say. Is it the money? I mean, I would like to see the relationship with Egypt improved. I mean, Anwar Sadat was a long time ago, and the relationship ain't all that great. And that's where most of the Arab world lives in terms of population. I don't understand, but apparently, the Saudi Arabia would be a really big deal. And so Hamas does something that is as provocative as it can. Provocative in that it is calculated not to be something that Israel can ignore. Meanwhile, knowing that the impulse for revenge, which will be unleashed because of those unspeakable things, will play right into Hamas's hands. That the impulse to revenge will lead the Israelis to do things that end up hurting Israel's long-term chances for survival. Because the Hamas has built its world in such a way that the only way to strike against it involves killing lots of civilians. I don't know what the Israelis. Imagine the Israeli government, as wise as a government could be, put in that position where Hamas has inflicted this stuff on them. It is obvious that they're trying to set a trap in which Israel will flatten Gaza in an attempt to strike at the people who struck them. And yet, what is the alternative? What are the alternatives? Well, I don't know. I don't know what the alternatives are, but I can see that the Israelis didn't do anything that looks more than blindly walking into the trap out of the impulse to take revenge, even if that means playing into the hands of the people who want to destroy you. At the very least, if I were the decision maker in Israel, and I got persuaded that somehow it really was necessary to go after Hamas in Gaza, even if that meant the kinds of civilian I mean, it's hard for me to believe, actually. But even if I were convinced that was necessary, at the very least, there are a whole lot of other things you could do to signal that this isn't genocide like the South Africans have accused them of. You know, that's bogus, because it's obviously that's not the intention. But why would a society jump into killing thousands of Gazan civilians when it's obvious that the way the world is going to look at that, and that it is going to rupture or damage all the progress that has been made in terms of integrating Israel into its region, which is vital to its long-term security and survival. It's going to besmirch its image in the world, a world in which anti-Semitism and double standards are known to be active factors in how the world regards Israel as a Jewish state in that part of the world. There's a lot to be lost, and the Israeli conduct doesn't show any signs of a real striving to minimize that loss. I mean, I would at the very least have cracked down on settler violence or put out to the Palestinian Authority certain proposals that lead in the direction of that are decent and wise steps to take now that might be conducive eventually to coming to the two peoples living at peace and security in the same region. I would have done something to try to indicate that the meaning of this thing that's happening in Gaza isn't just this ugly thing. It has the same moral stature that is consistent with what Israel needs to represent in the world and has slid back from representing, because right now the decisions are being made by the worst part of Israel, the fascist part of Israel, the Jewish nationalist part of Israel. Yeah, it's still this wonderful country, I'm sure. The richness can't disappear quickly. Just like in the United States. I mean, we had a nation being presidented over by Donald Trump for 4 years. How painful was that? See the president of the United States up there hogging national attention for self-indulgent, ugly purposes, telling lies left and right, demeaning everything about the office, selling himself. Very ugly. But we were still America. Israel is still Israel. But at the moment, decisions are being made by a group of people to whom Rabbi Hillel's injunction about not abusing other people in ways you wouldn't be happy to be treated is far distant from their spirit. They are the most broken of people, and they have blocked, evidently, any kind of move toward the Palestinians. And Netanyahu has now come out boldly and said he is not in favor of a two-state solution. Well, I understand the problems of a two-state solution, but what do you propose? How do two peoples for whom this is a homeland coexist over the long term in peace with each other? What else can you strive for? But this group doesn't strive for that. Fascism isn't looking for wholeness. And so it takes steps that are governed by brokenness. Vengeance is such a great tool of spreading patterns of brokenness. A strikes B, B strikes back, and so it goes on forever. A better way, and the goodness in Israel could create a government that would work toward a better way, and that is my hope. I hope to see this Netanyahu government fall. There are rumblings around the edges. Nothing serious that's visible to me yet, but I think there are good chances that we might end up with a different Israeli government. nonetheless, a lot of damage has already been done by the fact that Hamas set this trap for an Israel that was being governed by fascists. And fascists know only the path of destruction. It's not coincidence that the peace of Europe in 1939 was profoundly broken by a fascist dictator in Berlin invading Poland. It is not coincidence that a fascist dictator in Moscow upset the peace of Europe and the world by invading Ukraine in 2022. And it is not coincidence that this dynamic of brokenness that got, I mean, where do you want to start? But clearly an important point of departure was October 7th. I mean, the Israelis contributed to getting to there. But everybody had participated and nobody was required to do such unspeakable things. But the fascist Hamas force, it shows its ugliness in all kinds of ways that are fascistic, including its willingness to sacrifice its own people for its power. And then those fascist atrocities elicit from Israel a fascistic response that continues to make things more broken. So it's painful for me to see Israel damaging itself and its image by this confluence of events in which this move from Hamas occurred while this group from Israel was going to decide on a response. I know that there's a unity government. And I don't fully know how much comfort one is to take from that. And I'm aware that there are opinion polls that show that the Israeli people are not objecting to the basic leveling of Gaza. There is an opposition movement, but it's organized around the issue of really the right issue. Hostage situations are terrible things. Letting hostage issues govern when there's so much in the big picture that's at stake seems like a mistake. I wish that I could see that the Israeli people are saying, no, this is folly. Maybe they understand better than I do. Maybe they see that this is really necessary. Well, I can see that it's necessary to eliminate Hamas's control over Gaza. Is this the only way to do it? That makes any sense? You know, it's obvious that the world would see Israel as the aggressor very soon. I mean, October 7th is what happened. The media of the world are always looking at what's happening. So people forget about October 7th, and the one who strikes back always, is the one that people are looking at as genocidal. It reminds me of something you see sometimes in NFL games, that the referees see the guy that hits back, and he's the one that gets the personal foul. Well, it's quite predictable, especially if you got something ongoing. You know, it's with the Israelis and what they're doing to Gaza. It is ongoing. It's day after day after day. Innocent civilians. Well, even if they are to be considered just innocent, I don't know how innocent they are, but they're civilians, and they're dying in numbers that the world is upset by, and understandably. And that's not That's not the Jewish state being on the side of the good. And that brings up another dimension of the issue of why it's painful to identify with Israel right now, which is that we've discovered that there's more anti-Semitism out there ready to be aroused than I thought when I was growing up in 1950s and 60s America. I would hear my grandparents and their generation and even my parents' generation sitting around the living room talking about episodes that happened in the news and worrying about the rise of an anti-Semitism. I mean, my grandparents were had experience of pogroms under Tsar's rule. And that's why they came to America. And I thought it was kind of, oh, these folks are these folks are so not understanding of where they are right now. This is America. We in America have gotten beyond that. In the post-Holocaust America, and in the American Midwest where I grew up, I had almost zero experience of anti-Semitism. After I graduated from high school, I learned that the girl that I was interested in, and who seemed interested in me, had been forbidden from her mother from going out with me because I was Jewish. I only found that out later, but really, I had almost nothing. I remember one episode with my brother. I thought my older generations were just sort of, stuck in their traumatic past. But then we come up to our era, where the Republicans are continually conjuring up George Soros to embody the ancient image of the evil Jew. As far as I can tell, and I know something about Soros, he's one of the people that should be nominated for one of the good people of our times. I mean, he basically stands for the open society, which is the basic American values. I think he's a hero. But in the Republican world, he is the Jew who uses his money to spread evil things. And then you get a guy going into that synagogue in Pittsburgh and shooting a bunch of people. The number of anti-Semitic incidents is a multiple of what it was before. And so I've learned not to be so complacent about what seems to be a powerful current in Western civilization that's there for reasons we can conjecture about. And a lot has been written about it, including by me, by the way. But it has very little to do with reality, and it's one of the ways that brokenness works in the world. It can lead to things like the Holocaust, but plenty of other things before that, the Crusades and the massacres and other massacres later. I mean, this is part of the brokenness that's embedded in Western civilization, and apparently it plays some kind of a role so that it can subside, so that a boy can grow up in the American Midwest and think that the grandparents are just being, is America, not understanding that we've gotten beyond that kind of thing. Well, evidently, we've not, and this thing that Israel is doing, I do find it ugly. I still don't claim to know what the right response would have been, but I feel confident that something that would convey strength enough to satisfy the need not to take it lying down but that would adopt stratagems that were not what Hamas was counting on, having to do with the slaughter of the human shields that they had set up their system to protect them. I would think that creative people with some vision for the peace could have devised something more sophisticated than what we see happening now. A mixture of messages and the use of scalpels rather than bulldozers. I could be wrong. I'm not in that situation. And I wrote at the time that this happened, that was the most, I'd never seen a set of decision makers confronted with a more complex problem than what faced the Israelis, including the problem how not to make it a regional war and how to deal with the balance of power between themselves and Iran that wants to wipe them off the map. I mean, it was really terribly difficult. And, you know, I wish there had been a contest judged by God of everybody submitting the decisions that should be made, and God saying, yeah, this is the best. That would have been neat, because I bet it would look very creative. But I don't know what it would be. It was a very difficult situation. But the Israelis have just acted in ways that are whose brokenness is embodied in part in the fact that they have made it more likely that Hamas's desire for Israel to disappear from the map so that their people will get to be the rulers of the whole land from the river to the sea. It's a blunder. It's a sign of the brokenness that has taken power in Israeli society that represents its worst. And it's painful to identify it at this moment when the decisions are having big ramifications on the image of the nation on the whole world. Thanks.